A public service announcement for type 2 diabetes. The human body homeostasis.
So basically what we did here was we started making a model for two purposes. The first was to test the validity and prove the validity of our Theory Garden software. And the second was to show the basic model of what happens to the blood glucose level in normal people. So as you can see here, everything oscillates with respect to each other. So, for example, the glucagon and the insulin, which are competing hormones, they oscillate in comparison to each other, and you constantly have the glucose level oscillating about zero. So what we see here is a fairly accurate model. It's not completely accurate because there are some delays which you can't totally accurately represent with the software, but it shows a good basic understanding of what will happen in the human body.
So what is diabetes? Diabetes, there are two types, one being type 1 and the other type 2. Type 1 is an autoimmune disease where the immune system itself attacks the insulin-producing parts of the pancreas. It generally, onset is generally when you're young, but it can come into play with age. Type 2 diabetes is a common diabetes that affects millions of people every year. It is the process by which the cell stops responding to the insulin being produced by the body. Therefore, blood sugar level is increased in the body and none is taken in.
So a couple quick statistics about type 2 diabetes or diabetes mellitus. Currently, 23.6 million people in the United States, or about 7.8% of the total population, are afflicted with this disease. Based on this statistic and previous rates, about 1 in 3 Americans will develop diabetes sometimes in their lifetime. And those with diabetes will lose on average between 10 and 15 years of their lives. Another interesting statistic which we dug up was between around 1970 and the current time period, the rate of diabetes has about doubled. And from the graph you can see from the late 50s to the early 90s, it's increased by fivefold.
Some causes for diabetes include age. When people are above 45, they have an increased likelihood of gaining diabetes. Of course, high levels of cholesterol affect diabetes as well. High triglyceride levels, high blood pressure, previously identified impaired glucose tolerance by your doctor, as well as race and ethnicity. African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans all have higher rates of diabetes.
So here we see a quick snapshot of the nephron, which is a functional unit of your kidney responsible for filtering your blood. This is important in diabetes because in the proximal tubule, which is labeled by the number 2, you have glucose transporters. So the fluid that's filtered from your blood will contain a lot of glucose, and the glucose transporters are responsible for bringing the glucose back into your system. Unfortunately, when you have an extremely high blood glucose level, like diabetics have with diabetes mellitus, those transporters are no longer able to deal with that capacity of glucose, so the urine becomes saturated with glucose, which is where the name mellitus comes from, since that means sweet.
Complications of diabetes include many. Diabetes is actually more of a cardiovascular disease than anything else. One aspect of diabetes is the cause of glaucoma, which deals with high pressure in the eyeball itself. But this is caused by sugar being trapped where normally fluid produced by the eye leaks out and into the outer surface of the eye. The glucose in the blood vessels stop this discharge, basically, increasing the pressure of the eye, thereby pinching the optic nerve and crushing it, which slowly helps make the person become blind.
And this vision loss is a byproduct of atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries. And this happens when the glucose molecules start attacking the sides of the arteries, and then there's an immunoresponse which causes the immune system to build up around these small tears in the arteries, which ultimately leads to smaller pathways for the blood to travel through, and thus higher blood pressure. So here what we have is the ultimate complication, which is a diabetes-induced coma. This is just a quick chart which shows how this can get out of control very quickly. As you can see, all of our factors here include initially the inhibition of insulin receptors, which is our type 2 diabetes, which negatively affects your glucose uptake by your cells. Now, this cascades positively until you get to your sodium and water excretion, which has a negative impact on your arterial blood pressure. Ultimately, all these factors lead into a decrease in your brain activity, which will then lead to a massive increase in the incidence of coma. Now, here we've highlighted the brain activity line to highlight how fast it can degrade. So you can see initially there's really no damage that happens, and then it very quickly exponentially drops, which is very frightening to see. Now what we see here is an evolving map from the Center for Disease Control relating to obesity rates in America. Now as you can see, obesity rates have grown shockingly fast, and research has shown, and we'll see later a further connection, that obesity and diabetes are very closely connected.
This trend also corresponds with the success of fast food restaurants and the introduction of high fructose corn syrup and general foodstuffs. The fast food industry has increased at a minimum of 2% each year since the 1980s. High fructose corn syrup use has also increased sharply during the early 80s. The body metabolizes high fructose corn syrup differently and does not give the same signals of fullness as sucrose, signals produced by leptin. Adiponectin, a novel adipose-specific protein with putative atherogenic and anti-inflammatory effects, is decreased in obese individuals as well.
So we quickly found prescription methods to treat type 2 diabetes, and one was the drug Avandamet, which is a combination of two types of drugs. One is called metformin, which reduces the liver breakdown of glycogen into glucose by inhibiting glucagon. Now, by doing this, going back to our first model, it initially and very quickly prevents the addition of extra glucose after long periods without eating. The other drug in there is rosiglitazone, which activates receptors for the cells of insulin activation. And once these are activated, the excess insulin in the bloodstream will cause glucose to be absorbed rather rapidly.
Here we have a theory of the rate of diabetes in relation to obesity, as well as awareness, proper diet, and active lifestyle. What we first did was increase the level of obesity to see what its effect was on the rate of diabetes. As you can see here, we have an oscillating trend that explodes. But if you look carefully, the rate of diabetes is positive, and the integral of the rate of diabetes, which is the level of diabetes, is therefore positive, and as obesity levels are up, so are diabetes levels.
After this, we increased the levels of both the diet and the activity level of a normal person. By doing this, we initially counteract the amount of obesity, which then directly affects the diabetes rates. Again, if we look at the green line, which is our rate of diabetes, and then take the integral of that, we can see that a lot more time is spent by the line in the negative axis than in the positive axis. So therefore, the level of diabetes is actually decreasing sharply.
Final thoughts. So what we've seen in our models and all the research we've done reveals to us that, first, diabetes is a very debilitating disease, but there are very easy ways to prevent it. They include exercise, weight loss, as well as a proper eating diet. All of these can result in longevity and a healthy life. If obesity levels decrease in America, so will the rate of diabetes, so will the rate of many other debilitating diseases like glaucoma, renal failure,
Heart
attacks, blood pressure, many different diseases.
In other words, very simply put, the simplest way to prevent diabetes is to watch what you eat and make sure you exercise at least 30 minutes a day to stay in reasonable physical conditions. Thank you for your time.
As we said.